Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the sleepy sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow who enjoys facts, ancient sports, and things that time has gently folded into quiet history. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in new and ancient and medieval games. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode of Ancient and Medieval Sports Rules, those curious practices from long ago that seem quite strange and softly surprising to our modern ears. In the ancient Olympic Games, a soft restriction rested upon the athletes: only free Greek men could compete. This meant that slaves, women, and foreigners, all were tenderly excluded from participation, preserving the competition as a delicate expression of Greek civic identity. What is perhaps even more quietly remarkable is that these athletes competed entirely nude. Yes, without clothing of any kind. This was not merely a fashion choice, but a custom rooted in admiration of the human form and the pursuit of idealized physical perfection, a reminder that vulnerability was part of the honor. Yet, even as athletes embraced this bare state, married women were forbidden from watching the games, under the grave penalty of death. Such a prohibition, severe and absolute, reflected ancient societal rules about modesty and control, a quiet shadow over the otherwise vibrant festivals. Let us float gently onward to medieval archery, a practice that carried its own serious demands. Archers, in some contests, had to prove their skills by shooting at live animals, a fact that stirs no excitement but a soft, careful contemplation of past customs. In rarer, more extreme instances, archers sometimes even targeted human adversaries, an uncomfortable reminder that medieval contests could blend sport with survival. This leads us to early Australian rules football, a game that, in its infancy, allowed players to tackle from any direction, even from behind. Such freedom, while sounding rough to our modern senses, was part of the evolving nature of a sport seeking balance between challenge and chaos. These tackles often caused serious injury, a quiet truth about early sports ruggedness. Lastly, consider ancient athletics, where some foot races were held in armor or heavy clothing. Imagine the weight, the heat, the effort, all layered onto the simple act of running. This was not just a race, but a test of endurance and strength, a slow and steady trial of body and will, wrapped in the soundless weight of metal and fabric. This fact is not exciting. Not even a little bit. And that is just perfect. You may not care. And that is completely fine. In the softly unfolding history of badminton's old scoring system, there was a quiet rule that required players to achieve a 3-point lead in order to win a set. This meant the game lingered, like moss clinging to a shaded rock, extending beyond the usual back and forth until one competitor gently pulled away by those precious 3 points. Imagine, if you will, the shuttlecock drifting lazily in the warm, dappled light filtering through the leaves above, each rally a slow dance where the tension rises and falls like the turning of ancient, rusted gears. This measured demand for a clear advantage helped the game avoid sudden conclusions, inviting players, and those watching, to savor the drawn-out rhythm of a contest, where persistence whispered louder than swift victory. Let us float gently onward to a curious quirk that accompanied this older form of play. In a time not so long ago, badminton carried the peculiar and rather slow-moving tradition that only the server could score points during a rally. This meant that the player who sent the shuttlecock into flight had the quiet privilege of gaining a point, while the receiver's job was merely to return it, keeping the delicate feathered object afloat, like a drifting petal carried on a gentle breeze through a mossy forest. Should the server lose the rally, the score would not shift in favor of the opponent. Instead, the serve quietly passed to the other player, like a slowly turning cog shifting its weight in an ancient machine. This method, unhurried and somewhat restrained, lent badminton a rhythmic patience, where the rise and fall of the shuttlecock echoed the soft pulse of a heartbeat measured against the slow tick of time. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact about another ancient sport. In the rough and tumble world of bare-knuckle boxing, fighters sometimes found themselves so utterly weary or battered that they could no longer walk on their own. In these moments, a quiet mercy of sorts was granted. They could be carried to the scratch line, the designated starting point for the next round or moment of combat. Imagine the slow, careful hands lifting a fighter, the grunts and heavy breaths blending with the soft rustle of worn leather gloves and the faint creak of wooden floors. This gentle, if unusual, kindness ensured the contest could continue without the sharp finality that modern sports often impose. There were no formal breaks or neat rounds here, just the long, unyielding stretch of endurance and will. Let us drift, ever so slowly, toward the next curious detail. Unlike many contemporary sports neatly divided into timed rounds, bare-knuckle boxing fought to a different rhythm. There were no rounds at all. The match continued, sometimes for hours, until one fighter was knocked out or surrendered, a slow, unbroken saga of struggle and resilience. Imagine the atmosphere as thick as moss-covered bark, where every moment pulses with quiet tension, and every movement is measured against the gradual erosion of strength. The absence of timed intervals meant the fighters and spectators alike were held in a continuous flow of action, a rhythmic turning of ancient gears that never quite stopped until the end was inevitable. This unhurried brutality, while seemingly harsh, offered a kind of timelessness, a slow march into resolution without interruption. Turning now to the Central Asian game of buzkashi, we find a tradition wrapped in layers of strict custom and delicate respect. In this spirited contest, only men were permitted to touch the goat carcass with their hands during the game. This rule, while perhaps seeming peculiar to modern ears, was a quietly enforced boundary that shaped the game's flow and spirit. Visualize riders weaving through dusty plains, the heavy carcass clutched and wrestled with, all under the watchful eyes of a community steeped in ritual and history. The restriction of contact to male hands alone hints at a soft yet firm cultural thread woven through the game's fabric, a reminder of roles and rules preserved over centuries. Let us float gently onward into the tender spaces where tradition and sport quietly intertwine. In the quietly unusual world of chess boxing, a sport where the mind and body intertwine like the slow turning of delicate clockwork, players alternate between rounds of chess and boxing. Imagine the soft clack of chess pieces moving across a wooden board, each deliberate thought floating like a feather through the still air, followed by the thudding, rhythmic pulse of gloves connecting in the boxing ring. Victory can come in two gentle, yet very different ways, either by checkmate, where one player's king is trapped in an elegant final embrace, or by knockout, a sudden and silent fall that hushes the physical contest. This curious blend of calm strategy and rough endurance invites us to consider how opposites can balance softly, like moss and stone in a quiet forest. Let us float gently onward to a game played centuries ago in shadowed courts. Court tennis, a medieval precursor to the modern game we now know, kept its scoring quietly mysterious to the untrained ear, using the sequence 15, 30, 40, not 45, as some might assume. These numbers, gently borrowed and adapted through time, marked points with a soft, rhythmic pulse, like the slow ticking of a gear in an ancient timepiece, turning steadily but never hurried. Each point's value rose carefully, the final 40 standing in place of a 45, a subtle shorthand that whispers of traditions long past and softly evolving. One might imagine the ball bouncing through vaulted halls, the sounds muted by heavy stone walls and thick tapestries, each number marking a measured step toward victory. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact about a different kind of bat and ball. In the early days of cricket, bowlers sent the ball hurtling underarm only, a gentle lob rather than the fierce throws we witness today. This soft arc allowed batsmen to respond with swings in any direction, a quiet dance of possibilities played out upon a grassy stage that felt almost like a mossy glade in a timeless forest. The batsman's bat might sweep sideways or cradle the ball upward, all within the rule's tender allowances, creating an ever-changing landscape of angles and gentle contact. This slow evolution from underarm to the faster bowling styles of later centuries mirrors the turning gears of a great clock, where each turn marks a small change in the passage of time. Let us drift, ever so slowly, toward a curious old rule in the same sport. There was a time in cricket's long history when a batter could be given out for obstructing the field, even if this happened purely by accident. Imagine a soft moment of collision or hesitation, where a player's body, moving without intent, might gently disrupt the fielder's efforts. The rule, as quiet as a feather falling on a mossy floor, served as a reminder that even the gentlest interference, accidental or not, could alter the flow of the game. It's a slow, careful boundary between fair play and misstep, where human error meets codified order. The spirit of this rule whispers through the soft grass of ancient fields, a delicate balance between intention and happenstance. Let us float gently onward to a world of faster and more perilous movement. Chariot racing in ancient Rome, though a spectacle of thunderous speed and spinning wheels, carried with it a sobering quiet beneath the roar. Drivers faced brutal crashes, many losing their lives amid the dust and turmoil. Envision the wooden chariots, wheels turning like weathered gears, careening around the curved track, each spin a delicate balance between control and chaos. The danger was ever present, a slow, shadowy companion to the excitement, as the drivers risked everything in pursuit of victory and honor. This somber reality echoes softly in the spaces between the cheering crowds, a reminder that beneath spectacle lies a fragile thread of mortality, turning ever so gently, like the passage of time itself. In the softly remembered past of early dodgeball, players were permitted, a fact that may gently surprise you, to strike their opponents even on the head, without penalty. This allowance, strange and somewhat harsh to modern ears, unfolded like a slow turning of an ancient gear in the machinery of sport. Imagine the ball flying through the air like a drifting feather, its impact met with no soft cushioning but rather an accepted part of the game's fierce, physical nature. This rule crafted a space where players learned to dodge not only for fun but for survival within the game's flow, creating a rhythm of risk and retreat that might feel jarring to our calmer senses. Let us float gently onward to a more melodic contest, where the pulse of drums echoes across tranquil waters. Traditional dragon boat racing is a slow, rolling wave of teamwork and rhythm, where each team includes a drummer whose loud beats are not merely ornamental but serve to intimidate rivals and unify paddlers alike. Imagine the deep thrum of the drumskin, echoing through misty mornings like distant thunder rolling softly across a mossy forest floor. The drummer's steady pulse guides the paddlers, their oars slicing through water with quiet determination, all moving as one in a hypnotic dance. This ancient practice blends athletic exertion with ritual sound, creating a sensory tapestry where the pounding rhythm becomes the heartbeat of the boat, both calming and commanding at once. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact about a sport involving air and gravity. Diving contests in ancient times sometimes involved leaps from dangerously high platforms, an act that required not only courage but a slow and careful mastery of body and mind. Picture, if you will, an athlete poised on a rickety wooden scaffold, high above a still pool that mirrors the green canopy of a quiet forest. The jump is a moment suspended in time, a feather falling through air, where gravity pulls gently but insistently. The height added an element of risk and awe, as divers sought to impress judges with grace and control amid peril. This mixture of danger and artistry unfolds as a delicate dance between human ambition and nature's quiet laws. Let us drift ever so slowly, toward a contest of many parts and sharp spears. In the ancient decathlon, athletes engaged in a series of 10 events that included the javelin throw, a competition where the spear points were sharp and carefully crafted, not the soft practice tools we might imagine today. Envision a spear tipped with gleaming metal, slender and precise, resting lightly in the hand of a competitor surrounded by the soft murmur of a forest glade. The throw required strength, technique, and a calm mind, the spear slicing through the air like a slow-moving arrow, propelled toward its target with measured force. This event, part of a broader test of athletic versatility, echoed the quiet pulse of ancient training and discipline, reminding us how sports once blended practicality and ceremonial skill. Let us float gently onward to a darker, less gentle tradition. Dog fighting, a historical blood sport long since outlawed and rightly so, was once a brutal and common practice where dogs were set to battle each other in confined arenas. While this grim chapter of history is no longer a game, its quiet memory lingers like a shadow beneath the more pleasant tapestry of sport. Imagine the tense atmosphere, where animals fought not for play but survival, their struggles witnessed by crowds whose fascination with such cruelty seems distant and deeply troubling today. It is a reminder of how human entertainment has shifted, from harsh spectacles to gentler contests, and how compassion has softly replaced cruelty over time. Let us drift, ever so slowly, away from this shadow and toward lighter tales. In the medieval world of equestrian contests, some competitions asked riders and horses to leap not just over simple fences, but over live animals or treacherous, unnatural obstacles. These were not metaphorical hurdles, but very real, unpredictable elements like tethered livestock, burning barriers, or even human performers lying still, each transforming the quiet rhythm of the ride into something far more tense and precarious. One must imagine the horse, muscles rippling under the saddle, calculating the leap with quiet precision, its hoofs suspended like feathers over the danger below. There was risk not only for the rider but for those placed, oddly and rather worryingly, in the path of these high, sudden flights. This strange practice, though softened and forgotten by time, still echoes in the more controlled forms of show jumping we see today. Let us float, ever so gently, into an older rhythm, where the journey was long, and the silence deeper. Long before rules made things kinder, endurance horse racing in ancient times pushed animals far past their limits, racing them until exhaustion, collapse, or even death. It was a solemn dance between determination and fragility, the horses running across wide, empty spaces, perhaps beneath a sun so still it seemed carved into the sky. With little understanding of pacing or equine care, riders drove their horses forward with single-minded purpose, unaware of the quiet suffering building beneath their galloping legs. The finish line was not always a moment of glory, but a whispering testament to the harshness of early sport. The stillness that followed such races was not always celebratory. But first, a slow little detour to a much gentler contest, one often found in garden picnics and sleepy village greens. The egg and spoon race, though light-hearted by nature, was not always as simple as it softly appears. In some early versions, the eggs were not hard-boiled or fixed in place, but slippery, raw, or unusually heavy, sometimes even weighted slightly for extra challenge. This meant that each delicate step across the grass became a slow, trembling ritual of balance and breath. Imagine a child, brow furrowed in dreamy concentration, drifting across a quiet lawn, spoon held like a sacred tool, the egg wobbling like a moon on the edge of orbit. A misstep meant a gentle splatter, a sigh, and a return to the start. It was a small, quiet test. Not of speed, but of stillness. Let us drift, now, to a contest far less gentle. In certain historical versions of wrestling, long before the rules were softened and gloves became common, competitors were allowed to bite, to gouge, and to twist in ways that feel unthinkable today. These were not sports of form and flourish, but tangled rituals of grit and discomfort, where victory was earned through methods as primal as the forests surrounding the contest grounds. Picture two figures locked together in slow, grinding motion, dirt clinging to skin, breaths short and low like a storm gathering deep within. There was little ceremony and even less kindness, only the rule of force, played out beneath the canopy of time. And yet, from this wildness, the modern sport would slowly emerge, more measured, more humane. Let us float gently onward to a court shaped by history's odd geometry. Eton fives, an Old English sport born from the shaded corners of school buildings, is played on an irregular court filled with curious shapes and dangerous edges. Unlike other games, this one does not unfold on a flat, predictable space, but within a three-walled chamber modeled after a section of Eton College's chapel steps. The court includes buttresses, ledges, and blind corners, all of which can redirect the ball, or, occasionally, the players themselves, with a quiet sort of mischief. The game moves quickly in these cramped quarters, but always with a soft tension, as if the architecture itself were watching, waiting to trip or surprise. Many a scraped elbow or bruised knuckle has emerged from these walls, yet still, the game continues, turning and echoing like gears within an old timepiece, hidden away behind ivy and tradition. In the earliest days of fencing, when the art of the blade was still wrapped in layers of ritual and risk, no protective masks were worn. The fencers, gentle in footwork but sharp in steel, stood face to face, their eyes exposed, their skin bare to the sting of metal. Without the soft barrier of modern fencing masks, many matches ended not in clean points, but in bloodied cheeks and broken noses. The tip of a foil could slide across the face like the whisper of a fallen branch, or strike with sudden force like a snapped twig hidden beneath leaves. It was a test not only of skill, but of trust, precision, and the ability to flinch not at all. And yet, they fenced on, calmly, beneath candlelit halls and open courtyards, where each point was earned in delicate, dangerous silence. Let us float gently onward into a far rougher kind of field. Early medieval football, though carrying the same name as today's gentle weekend pastime, was more like a soft riot in muddy shoes. Tackling, tripping, and open fighting were not just permitted, they were expected. With few formal rules and no referees as we know them, entire villages would sometimes take part in matches that stretched from one field to the next, and sometimes from one town to another. The ball, often little more than a leather-stuffed bladder, became a symbol of chaos rather than strategy. A match could last for hours, or end with broken bones and bruised pride. This version of football was less a sport, and more a thundering expression of endurance wrapped in fog and sweat. But first, a slow little detour into something quieter, though no less puzzling. Modern fencing, while much safer than its older cousin, includes a curious rule known as priority or right of way. This rule determines who is awarded the point if both fencers land a touch at the same time. It is not always the one who strikes first, or even the one who hits cleanest, but rather the one who was considered to be attacking directly under the rule's gentle logic. For newcomers, this can be baffling, like trying to follow the drifting flight of a feather in a windless room. One must understand who initiated, who responded, and whether a parry or riposte was made, all while movements blur like falling leaves. This rule doesn't just shape the outcome, it slows the rhythm into a thoughtful dance, where decision flows like sap through the branches of an old tree. Let us drift, ever so softly, toward an ancient contest of speed and collision. In some ancient foot races, the path to the finish was anything but smooth. Unlike the measured lanes of modern tracks, these races sometimes featured brutal obstacles, pits, water, uneven stones, and in certain instances, interference was allowed, even encouraged. Runners might be pushed, blocked, or tripped by opponents or onlookers. These contests weren't just about speed, but about balance, cunning, and the willingness to stumble and rise again. Picture dust lifting from dry earth, sweat falling like dew from tired brows, and bodies weaving through chaos with quiet, desperate grace. The line between victory and injury was thin, and often crossed in silence. Let us float gently onward into a sky-bound contest of feather and claw. Falconry contests, though majestic in appearance, often unfolded beneath a quiet veil of difficulty and strain. Competitors, both human and bird, were expected to track and capture live prey under harsh, unpredictable conditions. Wind could shift softly across an open field, altering a hawk's path mid-flight. Prey could vanish into underbrush, leaving only the rustle of disturbed leaves behind. The birds, trained with tender care, would soar with precision, claws outstretched like tiny, curled scythes, while their handlers waited below in stillness. Success was measured not only in capture but in timing, in elegance, and in the silent bond between falconer and falcon. These contests, though competitive, unfolded with the hush of reverence, like the slow, sacred turn of the earth beneath watchful wings. Greco-Roman wrestling, among the oldest surviving disciplines in sport, flows like an old river, its current strong, but its course carefully contained. Unlike other forms of wrestling, it forbids all attacks below the waist, no trips, no leg grabs, no sweeping from the knees downward. This quiet restriction reshapes the match into something more upright, more deliberate, like two oaks swaying gently in a shared wind. Wrestlers lock arms, shift balance, and seek control not through brute ground tactics, but through patient upper body maneuvers. It is a study in posture and power, where the forbidden becomes the frame for beauty. Let us drift, softly and unhurried, to the quiet greens of ancient Scotland. In the early centuries of Scottish golf, this gentle game of long arcs and rolling greens found itself at odds with military duty. So often did men forsake their archery practice to play golf, that the sport was banned, not once, but several times, by Acts of Parliament. These were not loud or punitive bans, but slow, thoughtful attempts to bring focus back to bows and arrows, rather than soft swings through heather and mist. Still, the game endured, finding secret corners and quiet hills where the ball could roll like a wayward cloud, unbothered by royal decree. Golf and its players, it seems, preferred the wind's rhythm to the drumbeat of war. But first, a soft return to something sharper. Gladiator games in ancient Rome were less like sport and more like ritualized endings. Combatants were often required to fight until death, their lives weighed against the cheers of the crowd. Some were slaves, others prisoners, a few volunteers, but most shared a quiet understanding that survival was rare. The sand of the arena, stained and turned like soil beneath an old tree, bore witness to these brutal performances. Few left the arena as victors. Most departed only as echoes, their movements lost to the dust and sun. The crowd, vast and roaring, became a sea of unblinking eyes watching each final act unfold with terrible stillness. Let us drift, ever so slowly, from this harsh place to another game wrapped in softer tradition, yet not without its bruises. Early Gaelic football, much like its medieval European cousins, allowed for tackling with a freedom that could easily drift into danger. The rules, if they could be called that, were loose, and what passed for legal contact might today draw concern from even the most lenient referees. Shoulders crashed into chests like slow stones tumbling from a mossy hillside. Players often left the field scraped, battered, but oddly satisfied, the roughness accepted as part of the rhythm. There were few boundaries and even fewer whistles, just the long, unbroken play of bodies moving like wind through open fields. Let us float quietly onward into the world of Gong Fu. In certain traditional Gong Fu contests, protection was minimal and the endurance of pain was simply part of the form. Fighters would strike with full force, their hands and feet meeting bodies with a solemn, rhythmic impact, like drums heard from far away in the fog. These bouts were not frenzied or wild, but deeply controlled, movements passed down through generations, refined until they moved like the swing of a branch in wind. Bruises, swelling, and even broken bones were not unexpected. They were not seen as flaws, but as quiet symbols of discipline, each mark a line in the story of practice. The silence after each strike was sometimes louder than the blow itself. And yet, the fighters continued, patient and poised, within the slow ritual of the art. In the ancient Irish sport of hurling, swift rules governed even the gentlest movement. A player was allowed to catch and carry the ball, called the sliotar, for only 4 steps before they were required to strike it, either by hand or with a wooden stick known as the hurley. This soft constraint shaped the rhythm of the game, transforming it into a dance of movement and pause, of quick decisions and feather-light touches. Picture the ball arcing gently through the misty air of a green field, watched by still trees and quiet hills, each step a counting beat in a tune as old as the island itself. The limit was strict but poetic, ensuring the game never stilled, never settled, just flowed, like a stream moving patiently around ancient stone. Let us drift quietly now to a racetrack from long ago. In the earliest days of horse racing, a haunting detail gallops gently alongside history's records. Jockeys were often children. Their small size and light weight made them appealing choices for owners, despite the risks. Or perhaps because of them. Imagine a child, perhaps no older than 10, seated atop a powerful, galloping animal, reins in hand, the wind pressing against their fragile ribs. There were no helmets then, no cushioned falls, only hooves and dirt and the distant roar of the crowd. Many races ended in triumph, yes, but others ended in injury, and sometimes in silence. This tradition, strange and sobering, reminds us how the pursuit of speed once came at a deeply human cost. Let us float, ever so slowly, toward a wall and a ball not made for comfort. Medieval handball, unlike its modern cousin, was played with heavy leather balls that did not bounce, but landed with a dull, resounding weight. These balls, stitched and stuffed with care, could cause bruises or even broken bones when struck with force against bare hands or fingers. There was no soft padding, no smooth gymnasium floor, only stone walls, dirt alleys, or sometimes the sides of chapels and castles where the game could echo into long, shaded corridors. Players struck the ball with stoic determination, each impact ringing out like the toll of a distant bell. The quiet pain of each round was worn with pride, a silent testament to endurance. But first, a slow little detour into contests far more primal. Hunting games, as practiced in certain times and places, involved the live pursuit and killing of animals not just for survival, but as sport, a competition of skill wrapped in silence and forest breath. Participants would be judged on stealth, accuracy, and the size or rarity of the animal captured. Sometimes, these contests unfolded on horseback, sometimes, on foot. There were horns, yes, and hounds, and sharpened tools, but also long pauses, where the air stilled, and all one could hear was the soft rustle of leaves, or the distant footfall of prey. These moments, though quiet, bore the weight of both tradition and consequence. And from these woods, let us drift toward the rugged stones of the Highlands. The Highland Games, with roots deep in Scottish soil and spirit, include events that test not only strength, but a kind of serene fortitude. One such event is the stone put, where competitors lift and toss heavy stones, some weighing as much as a small deer. The task is simple in description but punishing in form, requiring careful balance, focused breath, and muscles hardened like river-worn granite. There are no machines here, no steel bars, just man and stone, on a field wrapped in mist and the soft watch of mountains. Every throw is a slow thunder, rolling through peat and grass. Let us float gently onward to a colder, sharper kind of ice. In the earliest forms of ice hockey, fighting was not only tolerated, it was expected. There were few regulations governing conduct, and when tempers rose, so too did fists. The frozen rink became a place not only of skill, but of sudden, swirling collisions and long, tangled scuffles. Helmets were often absent, gloves came off, and injuries, deep cuts, cracked teeth, bruised knuckles, were accepted like winter's chill, unpleasant, but ordinary. Imagine a puck sliding like a lost moon across the glassy surface, skates scraping like old iron, and behind it all, the breath of competition curling upward like fog in the dim light. Let us drift now into the earth-toned pits of India, where wrestling never rushes. Indian wrestling, or kushti, unfolds not on mats but in hand-smoothed earth. Wrestlers train in clay pits, their bodies covered in fine soil that clings like memory to skin. Matches are long, slow, and deliberate, sometimes lasting hours, often with minimal rest. This isn't a sport of flash or speed, but of patience, breath, and silent resolve. Every grip is studied, every movement calculated. The soil itself is prepared like sacred ground, sometimes mixed with ghee or turmeric, both for tradition and texture. As the sun circles high above, matches continue in soft determination. The only sound the sigh of shifting feet and steady exhale. Let us float softly onward toward a familiar court, but one that once played heavier tunes. Early indoor volleyball was not quite the breezy pastime it is today. The ball, in its first incarnations, was heavier and less responsive, demanding more from the arms, wrists, and shoulders of those who dared to volley. Each hit echoed with weight, requiring strong hands and thoughtful aim. Jumping and spiking, already difficult, became slow, laborious tasks under the strain of gravity's firm hand. The game moved with a slower rhythm, as if each point were pulled from the air like a weight lifted from water. Still, they played, with quiet joy and aching forearms, beneath ceilings where dust danced slowly in shafts of afternoon sun. Let us drift now toward a triad of trials. The Ironman triathlon, though modern in name, is ancient in spirit, a test of mind, body, and will stretch across land and sea. Athletes must swim nearly 4 kilometers, then cycle for 180 more, then run a full marathon of 42 kilometers, all without pause. There are no naps, no long rests. Just the steady churn of muscle and will. Imagine the breath of swimmers like bubbles rising beneath the surface, the hum of tires spinning along long, lonely roads, and the soft footfalls of runners at dusk. It is not speed, but continuation, that defines the Ironman. Not the moment of triumph, but the long, dreamy pursuit of it. Let us float gently upward toward frozen heights. Ice climbing, as practiced through history, was never a mere spectacle, it was a solitary conversation between person and ice. Climbers faced frozen waterfalls and vertical ice sheets, using crude tools, axes, crampons, rope, to inch their way skyward. The danger was not in loud slips, but in quiet fractures, invisible shifts beneath the surface. Each swing of the axe was like a whispered question to the ice, "May I go here?" And each grip, each foothold, answered with a silence deeper than any word. The ice would crack softly, or not at all, and the climber would climb. Not for victory, but for the gentle thrill of rising through stillness. Let us drift, ever so slowly, toward what comes next. In the carefully choreographed art of medieval jousting, there existed a rule that may seem quietly strange to modern ears: a knight could actually lose points for unseating his opponent with too much force. The goal was not merely to hurl a fellow rider from their mount, but to strike with grace and precision, splintering the lance upon the target without chaos or cruelty. A blow that sent a rider flying in a heap of armor and dust was seen not as a triumph, but as an excess, a disturbance in the delicate rhythm of the duel. It was, in a way, a test of restraint wearing the costume of violence. One might picture the hooves striking soft dirt, the lances meeting like clock hands at noon, and then a pause. To count the form, not the fall. Let us float gently onward toward a softer art that once carried hidden dangers. In the earliest forms of judo, before rules became their gentlest selves, there were throws so forceful and jarring that they were later removed from the sport entirely. Techniques like kawazugaki, where a leg was wrapped tightly around the opponents and pulled sideways to trip them, were once legal but quietly set aside in the interest of safety. These throws could cause serious injury to joints and spines, and though they were elegant in their own sharp way, they did not match the flowing philosophy of the sport's founder, Jigoro Kano. Over time, judo became less about domination and more about balance, of energy, of mind, of movement. Each throw a soft arc, a shifting of weight, like leaves settling slowly to the forest floor. Let us drift softly across water now. Jet ski racing, though modern and full of ocean spray, carries with it rules as delicately tuned as any ancient sport. One such rule whispers gently through the waves: riders may not jump the wakes of other competitors unless done within certain lanes and distances. Doing so, what officials call wake jumping, can lead to swift disqualification. It's not merely a matter of order, but of safety, as the backdraft from another craft can obscure vision and balance. Imagine the jet skis skimming across the water's surface like dragonflies, each wave a small mountain to respect, not conquer. In the silence between engines, the rules hum softly, guiding each racer not to fly too far from the calm. Let us drift, now, toward a game of stones and fingers, played long before plastic jacks. Jackstones, a game older than iron and just as patient, was once played with sharp-edged stones rather than the rounded pieces we know today. Players, often children, would toss a single stone into the air while attempting to gather others from the ground, all in a single breathless motion. But the stones were not soft, nor forgiving. Their corners bit at palms and fingertips, leaving scratches that told quiet stories of joy and concentration. The ground was the board, the hands the only tools, and the air, the gentle pause where hope hovered. A simple game, played slowly and often barefoot, beneath the hush of trees or within shaded courtyards. Let us float, gently, into a shadowed hall where tennis once began. Jeu de paume, the elegant ancestor of modern tennis, was first played with the open palm before rackets emerged as a helpful innovation. Players would strike a ball, often of cork or soft leather, with their bare hands, or later, gloves, against walls or nets, in a court shaped like a small, echoing theater. The name itself means game of the palm, and in its earliest days, the touch was everything. There were no overhead smashes or blistering serves. Only gentle strikes, the ball rolling off the skin like a whisper. Over time, rackets entered, followed by lines and rules, but the soft soul of the game remained, careful, circular, and kind. Let us drift into breath and bodies now. Kabaddi, a game born of the Indian subcontinent's dust and tradition, holds within it a rule that is oddly poetic. The raider, who crosses into the opponent's half, must continuously chant the word Kabaddi to prove they are not breathing in. This chant, soft and rhythmic, serves as a measure of breath control and presence. The moment they inhale, their turn ends. So the raider dances lightly, like a feather blown across sand, tagging opponents while holding their breath, repeating the word like a prayer, or a spell. The chant weaves through the air, fragile and deliberate, blending play with meditation. Each match becomes a poem of lungs and willpower. But first, a slow little detour to a time when strikes were measured by limit and not just strength. In early forms of kickboxing, clinching, the act of holding an opponent closely, usually to rest or disrupt, was deliberately limited to keep the pace aggressive and the exchanges constant. Too much holding was seen as stalling, a kind of stillness in a sport meant for motion. So referees stepped in, gently but firmly separating fighters who lingered too long in the quiet spaces between punches. This quiet intervention reshaped the sport's rhythm, ensuring that its heart continued to beat steadily, without pause. Fighters learned to move like reeds in a river, always swaying, always striking, always letting go. Let us float, now, into a court that welcomes both men and women, shoulder to shoulder. Korfbal, a Dutch-born sport, gently insists on something rarely mandated in the world of organized games: mixed-gender teams. Each team must be balanced, equally composed of male and female players, working together to score by throwing a ball into a high, open-ended basket. There are no backboards to aid the shot, no isolation plays to dominate the floor, only the smooth passing and quiet understanding of players moving as one. Defenders must match up by gender, but the rest is a shared dance, wrapped in equality and the slow beauty of balance. The ball arcs upward. Not just toward points, but toward something softer. Let us drift. Gently again. To the edge of air itself. In Kabaddi, yes, once more, we find an echo of that earlier rule, but let us peer again, more closely now, at the breath's journey. The raider enters enemy territory while exhaling, their voice carrying the word Kabaddi in a steady, unbroken stream. The rule is not simply about sound, but about presence. If the raider inhales before returning to their half, they are out. So the game becomes a balance of lungs and legs, of timing the moment of return before the breath gives way to need. There is no shouting, no fanfare, just the sound of one word, repeating, like a heartbeat spoken aloud. And now, let us float to the skies, where lines stretch like threads between clouds. Kite fighting, a tradition found in various cultures from Afghanistan to India, involves more than the quiet drifting of paper wings. The strings are often coated in powdered glass or abrasive paste, designed to saw gently, almost invisibly, through the lines of rival kites. The goal is not to fly the highest, but to cut your opponent free. In the sky, it seems serene, colorful shapes floating among clouds, barely moving. But beneath the beauty, the lines are tense, pulled tight like whispered rivalries between winds. When a string snaps, the defeated kite drifts, weightless and unconcerned. Its battle forgotten as it flutters gently to earth. Let us drift now, ever onward, to the next soft strangeness. In the earliest forms of lacrosse, a game with roots deep in Native American tradition, there were no fixed limits on the number of players, or even the length of the match. Teams could range from a handful to hundreds, and the playing field might stretch across entire meadows or forest clearings. Games often continued for hours, or sometimes days, pausing only for sleep or ceremony. The goals, made from wooden posts or trees, stood patiently at each end of the expanse, while players moved like birds through a tangled rhythm of passing and charging. The game, then, was less a contest of minutes and more a ritual of movement and breath, each strike of the stick echoing softly into the land. Let us float, now, into a colder channel of speed and stillness. Long before polished ice tracks and aerodynamic helmets, luge, one of the oldest sliding sports, was practiced with simple wooden sleds and careful, almost invisible steering. Athletes guided their path not with reins or levers, but by shifting the weight of their bodies, pressing one shoulder, tightening one calf, relaxing the curve of a foot. The sled responded like a whisper, gliding faster or slower depending on the subtleties of posture. Even the slightest twitch could send it veering wide or curling inward. To watch it was to witness silence in motion, as if the ice itself had chosen a favorite rider. The track was cold, yes, but filled with a quiet warmth of focus and glide. Let us drift gently back, to a longer leap of another kind. In the ancient Olympic long jump, athletes employed an unusual and almost poetic technique to enhance their distance. They would hold small handheld weights, called halteres, and swing them gently forward during the jump, releasing them midair or just before landing. These weights, crafted of stone or bronze, did not add flight, but subtly influenced momentum, like guiding one's own shadow. It required precise timing and delicate strength, the jumper coordinating arms and legs as if conducting a personal symphony of motion. Each jump was a brief suspension of rules, gravity briefly paused, breath gently held, and then a landing in soft sand. Let us float to gentler ground now, where the game rolls slowly, not soars. In the early forms of lawn bowling, the green was not always so green, and certainly not always so flat. Players used heavy wooden balls, known as bowls, shaped not quite evenly, which gave them a soft, curving path as they rolled. The ground, often patchy and sloped, added its own quiet unpredictability, turning each game into a patient negotiation between form and terrain. There were no sharp shouts, only the sound of wood meeting earth, and the slow tilt of balls changing course like dreams guided by breeze. A game of inches, of nudges and soft intentions, played beneath quiet skies and drifting time. Let us drift too, onto the river's surface. Traditional log rolling, or burling, asked players to balance on large, wet logs floating in lakes or rivers, while trying, gently but deliberately, to knock their opponent off into the water. The logs would spin underfoot, slow at first, then faster, like sleepy gears waking up. There were no sharp edges, no nets, only balance, rhythm, and the soft splash of a missed step. Each movement was a delicate negotiation, a back and forth of shifting weight and subtle footwork. The contest ended with a splash, of course, but began with stillness, two people standing quietly on the log, listening to the water's breath. Let us float slowly into something more chaotic. Medieval mob football, an ancestor of modern soccer, was a sprawling, unruly affair, often played between entire villages. There were few, if any, rules, and certainly no restriction on tools. Players wielded sticks, clubs, and anything else they might carry to push, block, or batter their opponents. The ball, large and heavy, was passed and kicked through winding streets and open fields, sometimes toward goals miles apart. What seemed like sport was often closer to a controlled skirmish, a tangle of shouting, clashing, and the deep thudding of boots on dirt. And yet, it was celebration too, where the boundary between game and gathering blurred like smoke above a winter fire. Let us drift from chaos to ceremony. Jousting, as practiced in the late medieval period, became a game not only of strength, but of scoring. One could earn additional points for breaking their lance cleanly upon the opponent's shield or armor, especially if the break was dramatic, but the blow was well controlled. It was not enough to hit hard, one had to strike artfully, with precision and restraint. A splintering lance that scattered like feathers in slow motion was a sign of success, of a knight's mastery. Each pass was a slow ballet of power and pageantry, the horses thundering beneath gilded armor, while the crowd held its breath. Not for violence, but for form. Let us drift now into a five-part ritual of the modern age. The early versions of the modern pentathlon were meant to reflect the ideal soldier of the 19th century, skilled in fencing, swimming, riding, shooting, and running. These 5 events unfolded not in one burst, but like verses in a quiet song. A touch with the épée, a glide through still water, a leap upon horseback, a calm shot into silence, and a long, steady run across open ground. The competitors became travelers of motion, passing through the 5 acts with breathy precision. Each discipline held its own quiet charm, but together they formed a portrait of quiet strength and versatility, drawn softly in sweat and steel. Let us wander now into the earliest octaves of combat's evolution. Early mixed martial arts competitions, long before modern regulation, allowed a wide range of techniques, some of them now banned for safety. Headbutts, groin strikes, and other vulnerable target attacks were legal, and often used without hesitation. The matches were raw, not in brutality alone, but in their honesty. There were no weight classes, no gloves, no soft corners. The fighters moved with primal rhythm, their breaths heavy and unguarded, the ring a place of total exposure. Each match ended not with spectacle, but with stillness, the kind that comes after thunder has passed. Let us drift, gently now, into one last stretch of dust and resolve. The first marathons, drawn from the legend of Phidippides in ancient Greece, were quiet tests of the body's boundary. Runners traversed great distances over dry and stony earth, with little in the way of hydration or rest. Water was rare, food rarer still. The path was not lined with spectators or aid stations, but with silence, interrupted only by the slow beat of sandals on soil and the wind whispering against skin. It was not a race of time, but of endurance. Of holding on just long enough to deliver the message, or reach the city, or see the temple rise on the horizon. Each footfall was a small prayer, spoken to the ground itself. Let us float, ever onward, to whatever quiet game awaits us next. In the earliest days of netball, movement came with quiet restriction. Once a player received the ball, they were not allowed to take a single step, only to pivot gently on one foot, turning like a weathered sundial beneath the sun. This rule, simple and soft in its intention, shaped the entire rhythm of the game. The ball passed with precision, not force. Feet remained planted, even as minds danced across the court. The stillness was not passive, but thoughtful. A pause nestled between choices. One could imagine players standing in a silent field, arms outstretched like branches, rotating just enough to shift the course of play. Let us float, now, into the frost-dusted hush of the north. Nordic skiing, one of humanity's oldest forms of winter travel, began not as sport but survival. Early skiers carved across snowy landscapes using long wooden planks, sometimes uneven, sometimes handmade from split trees. These first skis lacked modern bindings or wax, only leather straps and stiff boots connected human to wood. The terrain they crossed was not smooth, but wild, thick forests, frozen lakes, wind-blown valleys stretching endlessly white beneath pale skies. With each push of the pole, they glided a little farther through the silence. The journey was not swift, but steady. The kind of movement that sings quietly to the bones. Let us drift. From snow to speed, but not without a rule to slow it all down. During NASCAR's early years, the technique known as drafting, where one car follows closely behind another to reduce air resistance, was discouraged, and at times, outright banned. Officials feared it made races too fast, too unpredictable. But drivers, clever and persistent, understood its sleepy aerodynamic secrets. Nestled in the slipstream of a leading car, the trailing vehicle could conserve fuel and accelerate with less strain. It was a strategy that spoke in whispers rather than roars, a careful calculation of wind and distance. Though eventually allowed and embraced, drafting began as a gentle rebellion against the rules of speed. Let us drift, softly now, to a game not gentle, but fiercely old. Native American stickball, practiced for centuries by various tribes, particularly in the southeastern United States, was more than a game, it was a ceremony, a rite, and a test. Played with wooden sticks and a small ball, the rules were few and the physicality intense. Players could be struck, held, and tripped as they ran across open fields that spanned entire villages. The goal was to strike a pole or post, but the path there was rough and wild, echoing with shouts, song, and the steady rhythm of running feet. Some matches resolved disputes, others honored the spirits. And through it all, the game never hurried, never paused, just moved. Like a storm softened by memory. Let us float across rooftops now, to a training unseen. Contests inspired by ninja training, though later romanticized, were rooted in demanding physical and mental endurance. Participants were expected to climb sheer walls, balance on narrow ropes, and fight without weapons, testing every part of their body and breath. These contests weren't held in bright stadiums, but in quiet woods or stone courtyards, beneath the eye of a watchful teacher. Each step was measured, each task a meditation in silence and stillness. Success meant more than speed, it required patience, adaptability, and a calm mind. One might imagine a figure disappearing into mist, their only audience the rustling leaves. Let us drift into older rings now, where silence marked the end. In the solemn rules of ancient Olympic wrestling, a match could end with just 2 fouls. This quiet finality gave weight to every movement, every decision. A false start, or a grip too far outside the bounds, and the contest could slip away. There were no extended rounds, no points tallied with numbers, only holds, counter-holds, and careful breath. The wrestling itself was a low, constant struggle, like trees leaning gently against each other in wind. To watch was to witness not domination, but the delicate balance of strength and caution. Let us float from the arena into the unknown. Orienteering, in its early form, was less a race and more a wandering. Competitors moved through unfamiliar terrain, guided only by a compass and a softly folded map. There were no GPS signals, no digital voices pointing the way. Just contours, symbols, and the hush of wind in the trees. The challenge was not simply speed, but choice, each turn a decision whispered between moss and stone. Runners often paused, peering quietly at the earth, at the lines on paper, then up again toward the horizon. It was not a sprint, but a conversation with the landscape. Let us drift now into darker waters. Open water swimming, though modern in form, remains an ancient ritual of endurance. The race is not only against time, but against the winds of nature, currents, stings, waves, and the soft, drifting presence of jellyfish. Some swimmers glide through saltwater fields unaware of what brushes against their skin. Others feel the sudden pull of an unexpected tide. There are no walls to push off, no clean lanes to follow, just the steady rhythm of breath and arm, breath and arm, breath and arm. The water listens, gently, but does not help. It only holds. Let us float to targets now, not of water, but of wind. In Old English longbow contests, archers were not merely asked to hit a target, but to strike a moving one, often at distances stretching beyond belief. Some targets rolled, others swayed in wind, and still others galloped by, mounted on wheeled platforms or pulled by horses. The archer's task was to listen. not with ears, but with body, to feel the rhythm of motion, time the shot, and release not when the eye said so, but when the breath said yes. The longbow itself was a whisper of tension and grain, each arrow a soft letter sent into space. Let us drift, for one more moment, to a rough and rowdy field of play. Oina, the traditional Romanian ball game, carries echoes of both baseball and mayhem. Played with minimal formal rules and rough enthusiasm, the game features teams trying to strike and catch a hard ball, while opponents attempt to tag them out, often with firm, almost celebratory, physicality. Fields were often uneven, clothing improvised, and the spirit unrefined but joyful. There was no umpire, only agreement. The game ended when it felt finished, not when a clock told it so. One can imagine the laughter, the chases, the soft thud of ball on skin, all carried on the wind like smoke from a summer fire. Let us float, ever onward, to the next slow discovery. In the earliest versions of polo, a rule, quietly firm yet rarely questioned, stated that all players must use only their right hand to hold the mallet. This was not a matter of preference, but one of carefully balanced safety. If riders used opposing hands, the risk of collision, of swinging arms and clashing mallets, grew far too high. So, to preserve the smooth circular motion of the game, left-handed play was gently but strictly forbidden. It shaped the rhythm of every pass, every strike. Horses galloped in arcs, riders leaned in harmony, and each swing became a mirror of the one before. All this unfolded beneath wide skies, the soft thuds of hooves echoing against the wind like distant drums. Let us float into something rougher now, older, stranger, and far less restrained. In the ancient sport of pankration, often called a distant ancestor of modern mixed martial arts, nearly every form of combat was allowed, except for two carefully forbidden things, biting and eye gouging. Everything else, punching, kicking, choking, and joint locks, remained within the rules, if one could call them that. The contests were bare, not just in terms of equipment, but in spirit. Fought under open skies or within dusty arenas, the matches were as much endurance trials as they were displays of skill. No gloves, no weight classes, no timeouts, just two bodies locked in quiet struggle until one surrendered, or slept beneath the sun. Let us drift away from fists to a forest dotted with splashes of bright paint. Early games of paintball moved with quickness and silence, and a curious rule: the moment a player was struck, anywhere, they were out. One tiny splatter, one accidental flick of paint upon the leg or glove, and their match was done. This made the game not just about marksmanship, but about subtlety and shadow. Players moved with careful breath, crouching beneath leaves, stepping silently over fallen logs, or ducking behind inflatable shelters. A single soft impact could end it all, the color blossoming like a flower across a jacket. Each moment was a whisper of chance and caution. Let us glide now toward 5 quiet trials from a time long past. The ancient pentathlon was a collection of 5 tests designed not for entertainment alone, but to shape an ideal soldier. One event, often overlooked in its danger, involved horseback riding, on unfamiliar horses, over treacherous terrain. The rider had no bond with the mount, no prior training together. It was a leap of trust, from saddle to wind. Obstacles loomed, uneven ground offered no kindness, and still the athlete pressed forward. There was no showmanship here. Only survival and stillness. The reins tightened like a heartbeat in the hand. Let us float. Now. To rooftops and railings. Early practitioners of parkour, before safety pads and designated gyms, embraced the art of movement across the rigid forms of the city. Concrete walls became flowing rivers, railings transformed into bridges, rooftops into playgrounds. They moved not with recklessness, but with deep, deliberate intention. Yet without harnesses or helmets, each leap held risk, a missed step meant bruises or broken bones. And still they moved. Because the stillness between structures beckoned. The goal was never speed, but control. A slow conversation between muscle and geometry. Let us drift. Away from rooftops now. To fields of fiction and felt broomsticks. Quidditch, as played in real life by devoted fans of the fictional game, holds to one whimsical and steadfast rule: every player must hold a broomstick between their legs at all times. It doesn't matter if the player is sprinting, dodging, or leaping, one hand or thigh must always keep contact with their imaginary mount. This awkward requirement shapes the entire rhythm of the game, adding a layer of balance and challenge to every step. Balls fly, players stumble, and yet the broom remains, a reminder that this is a game of joyful imagination stitched into physical form. Let us float. Softly now. To a different kind of sprint. Quarter horse racing is not a long-distance affair, it is a burst. These horses, bred specifically for acceleration rather than endurance, compete over short distances, most often a quarter mile or less. Their muscular build and low, powerful stride allow for incredible speed right from the start, often outpacing even the sleekest of thoroughbreds. But only for a moment. The race is over in seconds. There is no time to settle into rhythm, only to explode, to stretch, to reach the finish before the world even has time to watch. Then, there is quiet again. Hooves rest. The dust drifts. Let us float now. From speed. To aim. Quoits, a game both old and slow, involves the careful tossing of metal rings toward a spike gently seated in the ground. It is not a loud game. There are no crowds, no sudden bursts of action. Only the soft clink of ring meeting earth. Sometimes with success, sometimes with a thud of quiet disappointment. Players stand still, arms loose, watching the arc of each toss as though it were the only thing happening in the world. The air hangs heavy with anticipation. The spike waits without judgment. And again, the ring is thrown. Let us drift. Deeper. Toward a martial art with an unusual focus. Quan Ki Do, a Vietnamese martial art, blends soft forms with precise strikes, many of which are aimed directly at vulnerable points of the body. Unlike some modern systems that avoid such areas, Quan Ki Do honors its roots in real-world defense, teaching practitioners to strike pressure points, the solar plexus, the throat, the inner thigh. Yet even in this targeted intensity, the movement remains fluid, slow, and graceful. Each form unfolds like a ribbon across space, the strikes appearing like punctuation in a long, gentle poem. It is not aggression, it is controlled understanding. Let us wander. Once more. to a game born of fiction, and perhaps of gentle confusion. Quixote Ball, a game that exists more in folklore and play than any formal league, involves throwing heavy, often handmade balls at distant targets, sometimes placed high, sometimes moving. The rules vary, if they exist at all. Injury is common, but never intentional. Some versions allow players to shout declarations, dramatic, chivalrous things, before each throw, as if channeling the noble Don Quixote himself. The ball arcs skyward like a forgotten promise, then lands with a thud, sometimes on the mark, sometimes not. The game is not about precision, but persistence. A dreamer's sport. And so, we drift onward, toward whatever forgotten field comes next. In the earliest, most rugged chapters of rugby's story, a practice known gently, but rather misleadingly, as hacking was entirely permitted. This term referred not to trickery, but to something quite literal. Players could legally kick at their opponent's shins in an attempt to halt their advance. The kicks were not polite nudges, but firm, intentional jabs with the sole or heel of the boot, sometimes sharp, often painful. And yet, this was the rhythm of the game, accepted as natural as a muddy pitch or a bruised shoulder. There were no padded uniforms, no protective headgear. Only the slow, shared understanding that this was how rugby moved through time. Let us drift from fields of kicking toward stones and silence, high above the trees. Traditional rock climbing, before carabiners clicked and helmets gleamed, was an affair of raw contact between skin and stone. Climbers used minimal gear, perhaps a rope made of hemp, perhaps a few handmade pitons, and often placed their own protection as they climbed, rather than relying on preset anchors. Every step upward was a whisper, a test of texture and trust. The stone did not speak, but it waited. Slopes of granite, ice-smoothed ridges, and crumbly sandstone towers offered no sympathy, only presence. The climber rose slowly, listening not to cheers, but to wind, gravity, and the weight of their own breath. Let us slide now to circles of wheels and elbows. Early roller derby, a game of speed and circling chaos, welcomed body contact. Players could shove, block, and jostle for position with hips and shoulders. But one thing stood quietly beyond the boundary of the rules: tripping. To reach out with a skate and clip an ankle, to unseat an opponent with a sneaky leg. These things were forbidden, not because they lacked aggression, but because they broke the flow. The game, even at its roughest, danced. It twirled on wheels, around corners, through noise. The clatter of skates was like thunder softened into rhythm. And so we roll into a race more ancient, and far more perilous. In the roaring amphitheaters of ancient Rome, chariot racing thundered across dusty circuits at breathtaking speed. The drivers, known as erigi, controlled teams of 2 or 4 horses, their reins wrapped around their waists for extra control. But this tether was a quiet danger. Should the chariot crash, the driver could be dragged mercilessly across the track. Crashes were common. Fatal ones, too. Wheels splintered, horses collided, dust rose in slow clouds. Yet the races continued, again and again, like rituals carved into stone. Let us float softly from wheels and reins to ropes and horns. The early days of rodeo did not move to standardized rhythms. Riders, often cowboys or ranchers, face wild bulls or horses without regulation. The animals were not specially trained or selected, they were fierce, unbroken, and unpredictable. There were no timed releases, no modern protective vests. A fall could mean a broken limb. Or worse. And yet the rider mounted, holding to a rope or saddle with one gloved hand, the other raised like a flag to the sky. The moment was brief, chaotic, and always remembered in silence after it passed. Let us drift now. To salt and stillness. Before each match in sumo wrestling, a soft ritual unfolds. Wrestlers purify the ring by tossing handfuls of salt into the air, letting it fall like snow over the surface of the dohyo. This gesture is not rushed. It is part offering, part preparation, a cleansing of space where earth and spirit meet. The ring itself, made of clay and sand, becomes sacred through this act, no longer just a circle of combat, but a place of old, slow tradition. Every stomp, every bow, every silent breath is soaked in ceremony. Let us slide downward now, to something much colder, and much faster. In the winter sport of skeleton, athletes lie flat on their stomachs atop tiny sleds and hurtle headfirst down icy tracks. Unlike luge, where feet lead, the skeleton racer leads with their face, exposed to the rushing blur of frost and wind. Speeds can exceed 80 miles per hour, and there are no brakes, only the subtle shifting of shoulders and knees to steer. The sled itself is barely more than a tray of steel and silence. One wrong move, and the ice does not forgive. But when done right, the descent is a frozen whisper of precision. Let us move now. Not forward, but backward in time. In medieval soccer, sometimes called mob football, players used their hands as freely as their feet. The rules were few, the tactics unrefined. A village might play against another village, with a goal set miles away. Tackling was enthusiastic, tackling was expected. Tackling was nearly the whole game. Some carried the ball, others shoved opponents into streams or hedges. There was no referee, just the steady tide of bodies moving like weather across fields and streets. It was not about score, but movement. Let us turn gently now to heavier contests. Stone-throwing contests, old and often overlooked, asked one thing only: take this heavy thing, and throw it far. The stone, sometimes rounded, sometimes not, rested heavy in the hand, warmed by sun and shaped by centuries of use. Athletes would breathe deeply, cradle the weight, then swing and launch it into open space. There was risk, of course. Backs strained, shoulders ached, fingers bruised. But the moment of release, when stone met sky and drifted, even briefly, into flight. It was soft, quiet, and full of intent. Let us drift upward now, to the long arc of snowy descent. Early ski jumping lacked uniformity, and with that lack came danger. Athletes leapt from slopes with no standard form, no agreed-upon posture to guide them. Some spread their arms, others tucked close. Landings were unpredictable. Techniques were passed down quietly, from observation, not textbooks. Each jump was a new experiment. And sometimes, a painful one. But the arc, the slow motion of body gliding through air above a snowy hill, was still beautiful. Even in chaos, there was grace. Let us float gently onward to whatever strange rule comes next. Tug of war, in its brief but sturdy Olympic presence between 1900 and 1920, was not a game of chaos but of quiet weight. Teams, 8 per side, dug their heels deep into the earth, not just in metaphor, but quite literally. Some would carve shallow trenches with the backs of their boots, anchoring themselves to the soil as though whispering to the ground for strength. The rope stretched long and thick between them, coarse as tree bark and slow to shift. Pulling was not frantic. It was rhythm, breath, the hum of muscles holding still. The whistle would blow, and the contest would begin not with movement, but resistance. And so, we slide from fields of rope toward courts where one foot must linger. In the earliest forms of tennis, long before stadiums and polished rackets, there was a curious rule for serving. The player, as they struck the ball to begin the point, had to keep one foot rooted to the ground. It couldn't lift or dance. It had to remain quietly loyal to the earth, like a stone beside a riverbed. This restriction made the serve an exercise in balance and intention, not power. Feet whispered to grass or clay while arms rose like branches toward the sky. The ball, struck just right, arced with gentle certainty. Let us float now. Gently. From lawn courts to tiny tables of spinning light. In older versions of table tennis, a rule softly enforced was the 6-inch toss. Before a serve could be made, the ball had to rise, not simply released from the fingers, but tossed a minimum of 6 inches into the air before contact. This ensured fairness. A visible moment. A pause in which both server and receiver watched the small orb float like a feather before the strike. It wasn't rushed. The elevation was measured, delicate. A good toss held its shape in stillness before returning to the paddle. We drift now. From this gentle arc. To a pole and a cord wrapped in sun. Tetherball, that lazy, looping schoolyard game, followed few written rules in its earliest years. 2 players stood on either side of a tall pole, and the ball, secured to a string, became their soft adversary. The goal was simple: wrap the rope entirely in one direction, so the ball kissed the pole in a quiet embrace. Yet how they reached this goal? That was often a swirl of improvised tactics. Slaps, blocks, sudden spins, all allowed. The wind might help or hinder. The ball danced in loops, faster with each swing, until it could swing no more. Let us float now. 2 races stitched into 3 trials and no pause between them. Early triathlons, much like their modern descendants, offered no rest between their elements. Athletes would swim, then cycle, then run, all in continuous succession. There were no intermissions, no scheduled meals or breaks for breath. Transitions were part of the race itself, and every step between each sport carried the same importance as the sports themselves. The shoes changed, the heartbeat stayed. Water dripped from limbs onto bicycle frames, which later pounded pavements in a silent, exhausted rhythm. It was not a sprint. It was a test of continuity. A string of motion sewn end to end. Let us drift. Now. To a disc that halts the moment it's caught. Ultimate Frisbee, created with a spirit of flow and respect, includes a quietly firm rule: once a player catches the disc, they may not run. Their momentum may carry them a step or two, but after that, they must come to rest, as though the act of catching anchors them softly in place. The game, then, becomes a kind of frozen dance. Catch. Stop. Look. Throw. Each player like a node in a slowly shifting constellation, connected by arcs of plastic air. Movement resumes only when the disc does. Let us drift downward. Into a game beneath the surface. Underwater hockey is played not atop the waves, but below them, on the tiled floors of swimming pools, where light dances through chlorinated haze. Players wear snorkels, masks, and fins, and carry small sticks with which they push a puck across the bottom. They hold their breath in intervals, diving, passing, surfacing for air like seals in slow communion. There is no shouting underwater, only the muffled scrape of plastic on tile. The puck stays low. The game stays silent. And the players move in quiet spirals between two realms. Let us wobble now. From fins to spokes. In unicycle polo, the ordinary game of hitting a ball with a mallet is elevated, literally, by requiring that all players ride unicycles while doing so. There is something inherently dreamy in the effort to balance on one wheel while steering, watching, and striking all at once. Players often sway like metronomes, correcting constantly, the game less about the ball and more about staying upright. The mallet swings low, while the wheel turns high. It is not fast, but rhythmic. An active balance more than aggression. Let us roll, gently, into the heart of cities past. Urban games, in their early, unregulated forms, sometimes included obstacle courses spread across rooftops, alleys, stairwells, and construction sites. These games, whether organized or improvised, were played without padding, without permits, and without pause. Participants vaulted walls, scaled ladders, ducked under railings, and leapt across gaps, testing not only physical skill but imagination. The urban landscape became a shifting, unpredictable playground. There were bruises. There were sprains. But more than that, there was freedom. Movement unfenced. And now, let us drift into the shadows of an ancient court, where the ball did not bounce, it bruised. Ulama, the Mesoamerican ball game once played by the Maya and Aztecs, was not gentle. The ball was made of solid rubber, weighing several kilograms, and players struck it with their hips. No hands. No feet. Just the motion of the body, curved and practiced. The game was played on stone courts, and the ball could bounce with heavy, jarring force. Bruises were expected. Injuries. Common. Yet the game was sacred, symbolic. Every strike was part performance, part prayer. The ball echoed not only across the court, but through time. Let us float onward into the next slow rule. In the earliest forms of volleyball, the ball, heavier and less forgiving than the feather-light sphere we know today, thudded softly against open palms and hardwood floors with a kind of sleepy deliberation. There were no rotation rules, No constant shuffling of players across positions like clockwork gears. Instead, teams lingered where they pleased, allowing the rhythm of each volley to settle like fog across the net. The game moved slowly, with each bump and set more ponderous than the last. The ball did not glide, it sagged, it sank, it demanded intention. And so, we drift now, toward a leap with no ticking clock. Early gymnastics vaulting was not bound by the time constraints we see in modern competitions. Athletes could take their time, stepping slowly toward the apparatus, breathing, focusing. The springboard and vaulting horse waited, silent and unchanged. There was no digital countdown, no hurried rush toward launch. Just a steady preparation, then an explosive movement, followed by a quiet landing, or perhaps not so quiet, depending on the dust and the shoes and the angle. The moment stretched, unmeasured. And with that, let us roll softly now, toward engines without helmets. Vintage car racing, in its earliest days, offered little in the way of safety. Helmets were rare, seatbelts were often absent, and drivers wore simple caps, goggles, and wool coats, more suited to a picnic than a high-speed contest. The cars themselves rattled like wind-up toys, their engines loud but fragile, their tires narrow and thin. Speeds were high, visibility low, and danger ever present. The races unfolded on unpaved roads, across dusty countryside or cobbled city lanes, with spectators standing mere feet from the passing vehicles. Yet still, they drove. Let us ease now, toward something older, and perhaps a bit more sharp. In Viking times, games of sport and contest often blurred into trials of combat. Wrestling, axe throwing, stone lifting, and even duels of sword or staff unfolded with few rules, if any at all. Injury was not uncommon, it was expected. These events were not only tests of strength, but of endurance and status. Blood was not feared. Cheers echoed over fjords and forests as opponents circled, clashed, and fell. The ground was not chalked or marked. It was just earth, waiting. Let us sail, quietly now, toward a stage not of land, but of water. Vietnamese water puppetry, while often seen as gentle performance, could also become a kind of competition, between troops, or puppeteers, or within festivals. Beneath the murky surface, puppeteers stood waist-deep or deeper, unseen by the audience. Their arms reached out through long bamboo rods, guiding wooden figures in delicate dances across the pond. Balance was essential. Timing, more so. The stage rippled and swayed with each puppet's move. A splash too early, a tilt too far, and the story would crumble. Let us drift, from the water's surface, to ancient circles of chalk and stillness. In Greco-Roman wrestling, a rule still firmly held today stands gently yet immovably: no attacks below the waist. This limitation shapes every move, every counter, every plan. Unlike freestyle wrestling, where legs may tangle and twist, here the battle remains focused on the upper body, on throws, on lifts, on leverage of shoulders and hips. The grip must rise. The legs are sacred, untouched, off limits. It is as if the lower half of the body were hidden behind an invisible curtain of tradition. Let us now, submerge. Where the bottom of the pool is forbidden. In early water polo, players were not allowed to touch the pool floor, even if it was within reach. This created a strange, floating contest where treading water became a quiet, constant background effort, like breathing. The ball skipped across the surface. Arms flailed in silent splashes. But the feet, always, must remain suspended, never planted. It added not just difficulty, but an odd sense of grace. The game became a ballet of limbs above invisible anchors. And so, we drift gently now, toward a barbell without rubber grips. Weightlifting in its earliest competitive form required lifters to perform strict movements with barbells that lacked the sleek design and ergonomic padding of today's tools. Iron plates were solid, uncoated, and rough. Chalk was sparse. Shoes were ordinary. And yet, the lift was sacred. The clean and press. The snatch. The hoist from earth to air. All judged with slow, watchful eyes. The movements were performed not for the roar of crowds, but for form, precision, stillness and strain. Let us wander now into a forest of gates and tapping sticks. Wood ball, a lesser-known traditional sport from Taiwan, is a game of delicate direction. Players strike wooden balls, not with clubs like in golf, but with curved wooden mallets, guiding them through narrow gates set along grassy courses. There is no rush. Each hit is calm, deliberate, sometimes barely audible. The ball does not roll quickly. It glides, as if unsure whether to proceed. Players walk beside it, mallet in hand, watching its progress like one watches a cloud, gently, patiently. Let us now meander, one slow footstep at a time, toward something unexpectedly domestic. Wife carrying, a sport from Finland both whimsical and oddly demanding, asks competitors, traditionally men, to carry their partners across an obstacle course of sand, water, and slopes. The wife need not be an actual spouse, but must be heavy enough, by rule, to qualify, usually at least 49 kilograms. The method of carrying varies, but the Estonian style, upside down, legs around the carrier's shoulders, is oddly common. Feet splash through puddles. Breath comes in gasps. But laughter lingers too, and the prize, traditionally, was the wife's weight in beer. And with that curious note, let us float gently onward. In the gentle hills and mountain villages of the Basque region, there exists a sport known as zare. Players do not strike the ball with a flat racket, but rather cradle it, using a long, netted racket shaped like an oval spoon. The ball is tossed, caught, and thrown again, moving with startling speed across a small, enclosed court. The rhythm is almost musical. The netting of the racket makes a sound not of smacking, but of soft collecting, as though each motion were a breath. Games are swift, yet curiously quiet. Each pass is a lullaby, each volley a whispered secret shared across a threadbare net. Even the court seems to hum in contentment. Let us float now, deeper into the cradle of risk and rebellion. Early forms of what we now call extreme sports, those defiant dances with gravity like base jumping, freestyle BMX, and early skateboarding, were performed with almost no formal safety oversight. Helmets were rare. Pads, optional. Trails were unmarked, and ramps were homemade. Participants learned through falls, not instruction. Injuries were common, and yet, strangely, expected. These sports blossomed in the cracks of cities and forests, blooming in alleyways and cliffsides. There were no scoreboards. Just motion. And asphalt. Bruised knees and stitched eyebrows became badges of honor, worn proudly beside baggy jeans and duct-tape sneakers. And still, they soared. Let us drift now, across the board, to a war of silence. In Xiangqi, sometimes called Chinese chess, strategy flows like tea poured slowly into a still cup. The pieces, generals, cannons, soldiers, move across a board marked by intersecting lines, not squares. But a curious, quiet rule governs their fate: once a piece has moved forward, it cannot retreat. There is no turning back. The soldiers only advance. Each step a commitment, like writing with ink rather than pencil. Even in hesitation, progress continues. It is a game of rivers, fortresses, and inevitability. The past becomes unreachable, tucked behind the silent footfalls of each wooden disc. Even silence feels strategic. Let us pause, only to leap once more into the same net, but from a different angle. Another form of zare, played often on irregular or asymmetrical courts, adds an extra twist of unpredictability. The court itself, sometimes a narrow alley or slanted surface, shapes the strategy as much as the players do. Ball exchanges can be lightning fast, ricocheting off stone or wall, skipping low across wooden floors. The player, too, is in motion, darting, collecting, releasing, all with a racket shaped like no other. It is not a game for idleness, yet it unfolds in patient rhythms. Corners echo with strange angles. No two matches feel quite the same. And now, let us step into the spotlight of showmanship and shadow. In the earliest chapters of extreme wrestling, long before television lights gleamed, moves were allowed that have since been gently retired for safety. Chair shots to the head, unpadded suplexes onto hard surfaces, and unregulated stunts atop ladders or cages were part of the spectacle. It wasn't entirely scripted then, pain was real, bruises earned nightly. The line between performance and punishment was thin, blurred by theatrics and adrenaline. But the crowd never blinked. There was poetry in the fall, theater in every groan, and silence after the slam. And now, let us drift from mats and ropes to quiet waters and drifting sails. Early yachting races, those nautical ballets of wind and willpower, required sailors to navigate vast courses without modern aids. No GPS. No buoy markers. Just charts, compasses, and the fickle mood of the sea. The sails whispered like parchment, and the hulls groaned under weight and spray. To win was not merely to be fast, but to be precise, knowing how to read a windshift by the trembling of a pennant. The race was not only against time, but against uncertainty itself. Sea foam curled at their wake. Direction came not from instruments, but instinct. Let us breathe deeply, and stretch slowly into something far more still. Competitive yoga, though rare and often debated, does exist in certain circles. Participants are judged on the duration and precision of holds, flexibility, and composure. The poses are ancient, but the scoring is modern, points given for alignment, breath control, and grace under pressure. Time becomes elastic in these contests, as muscles tremble and stretch without visible strain. It is performance without movement, exertion without noise. A pause wrapped in poise. Breath is both clock and compass, guiding the limbs like quiet metronomes. Let us now tiptoe across snowy fields, where cold becomes the judge. Yukigassen, the structured sport of snowball fighting, originated in Japan but has gently spread like frost across nations. Two teams face each other, each player armed with carefully formed snowballs. If one is struck, they are out. There are barriers to hide behind, strategies to plan. But beneath it all is the soundless hush of snow, broken only by the soft thump of impact. A perfect throw is both silent and swift. Winter, it seems, has its own tournament. Gloves are worn not only for warmth, but for grip. The rules are as fragile as the flakes themselves. And now, from the chill of snow, to the gallop of thundering hooves, Yubusame, the ancient Japanese art of horseback archery, marries two things that rarely stand still, archer and horse. The rider gallops down a narrow track, hands holding a yumi bow as long as the rider is tall. Targets are struck mid-gallop, arrows released in rhythm with the stride. The act is ceremonial, spiritual, and precise. The archer wears traditional robes, and the horse's hooves echo like distant drums. Each arrow that finds its mark does so with no sound but the breath of motion. Precision blooms in midair. Even the wind knows when not to interfere. Let us turn now to roots, soil, and a different kind of harvest. In yam championships, a tradition in parts of West Africa and some agricultural festivals, the humble yam becomes a subject of pride and pageantry. Competitors bring forth their harvests, not just any yams, but the largest, most symmetrical, and heaviest. Each one weighed, each shape admired. The event is more than a contest, it is a celebration of soil, sweat, and slow-growing bounty. Time does not rush a yam. It waits. It thickens underground in quiet darkness. And when it emerges, it is met with gentle applause and weighing scales. Even its curves are admired. A lumpy trophy of patience and persistence. Let us float gently onward, toward the next peculiar rule. In the gentle tumble of zorbing, participants find themselves enclosed within enormous, transparent spheres, giant bubbles rolling slowly or swiftly downhill, depending on the slope and gravity's quiet insistence. Inside this inflated globe, bodies are cradled by soft air cushions, each roll a gentle oscillation between chaos and calm. The world outside becomes a blur of green and sky, shifting in a dreamlike dance, while inside, the slow spinning induces a trance-like wobble. It's a sport of balance and surrender, where control slips away like mist. Let us float gently onward, imagining the world viewed from within this spinning bubble of quiet chaos. Zeus Ball, a traditional game with roots often forgotten by modern memory, invites teams to toss heavy, dense balls toward distant targets while dashing across uneven fields. The weight of the ball presses against the hands, a solid promise of gravity and effort. Players run with lungs heaving, muscles softening and tightening in rhythm with each step. The thud of the ball hitting earth echoes faintly like a heartbeat. Precision and power meet in a dance that is both rough and reverent. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, these balls were often made from tightly bound leather and filled with sand or stones, heavy with the earth's own patience. In a curious corner of novelty sports, Zamboni racing emerges, where drivers take modified ice resurfacing machines, those familiar to the quiet hum of frozen arenas, and turn them into raucous competitors. The machines, designed to smooth ice into glassy calm, here become roaring chariots of whimsy, racing in circles or slaloms on frozen rinks. The drivers steer with slow deliberation, the grinding sounds of the Zamboni's blade and motor a mechanical lullaby. It's an oddity, a brief rebellion against the usual rhythm of ice, a reminder that even the most utilitarian machines can dream of flight. Let us drift gently along this icy circuit of sound and motion. Zoolympics, though a fictional spectacle, invites us to imagine animals competing in games where rules are few and instincts rule supreme. From squirrels leaping between branches to turtles ambling across sun-dappled stones, the contests unfold with the slow precision of nature itself. No whistles or scoreboards dictate these trials, only the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle murmur of a distant stream. The idea hums quietly like a forgotten story, a whimsical tableau of creatures acting out ancient dances of survival and grace. Let us pause now, to watch this dreamlike menagerie move beneath the canopy of an endless forest. Zui Quan, often called drunken fist kung fu, is a martial art that mimics the staggering, weaving motions of an intoxicated dancer. Competitors move with fluid awkwardness, swaying as if under a heavy yet invisible burden. This mimicry serves to confuse opponents, who are caught off guard by the unsteady, unpredictable flow of limbs and body. Each movement is both a deception and a delicate performance, like wind bending softly through tall grass. The art requires not only physical skill, but also a deep understanding of balance and rhythm. And now, let us float slowly onward, through this quiet dance of illusion and grace. Let us drift, ever so slowly, toward rest. You need not remember any of this. It's enough to let the shapes and ideas settle gently into the quiet spaces of your mind. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.